My guest today is someone who has been incredibly influential in how I go about my day-to-day life. My journey with faith has been such a driving factor in how I find joy, and this man was an absolute catalyst for helping me get down that path. For 3 years, I had the privilege of watching him lead in the church, on a collegiate rowing team, and most importantly, in everyday life. Without further ado, Seamus O'Brien. Seamus O'Brien, one of my good friends from college, someone who I admire a lot and someone who I really look up to. And I know a lot of people in our close circle, maybe they won't even tell you in person, but I know that they feel the same kind of way. What don't I know about you? What don't our college friends know about you from your childhood? What helped make you into this incredibly emotionally intelligent, wise beyond your years type of person? Let's go into that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, first off, thanks for having me. I really appreciate being here, and thank you for those kind words. I feel like that's probably not gonna be the last time I think that, at least in this conversation. Um, but yeah, what made me who I am today, pre-college? Because as you point out, there's not actually a lot of people that went to Fairfield that knew me before college. Um,
Mm-hmm.
not a lot of people from my high school or friends from home. I feel like partially intentional, but I think, when I think about my childhood, a lot of it has to do with the fact that I grew up in a house with just my parents. Like I think it's difficult for some people to understand the level of, I don't say maturity, but like the different dynamic of having another child in the house versus just two parents, and the way you communicate and the way things kind of go about, and just the environments that you're in. I feel like, at least for me personally, I feel like I always kind of had to be on my game. And that wasn't just in the house, but my mom is for those who don't know, my wonderful mother. She is literally a saint. Um, it makes amazing food. She was a first grade teacher in my grade school. So small school on top of like already being at home with just my parents. I could never escape really being far from my parents' like grasp. Not to say they were like helicopter parents by any means, but just, that changes your perspective on, I think, how you go about your day to day. We'll leave it at that to start, I guess.
Yeah, that's a pretty solid start. I know from my own personal experiences, just kids on the playground teasing only children. The biggest knock I always hear when it comes to an only child is that they're not good at sharing. They're not good at being around others
Yeah.
because they're used to absorbing all the attention. They're the center of attention 24/7. That's not you though, not in the slightest. You are the biggest team player that I know. You're always looking out for other people, and you put yourself behind others in all situations. Like you said, your mother was around a lot. I've met both of your parents. They're lovely people. What do you think separates you from the norm when it comes to only children? What was there a specific event that took place in your childhood that made you want to stick up for other people as much as you do, or is it just something that's always been ingrained in you, whether it's from your parents or any outside influence?
Yeah. Dare I say just good parenting.
Yeah.
But no, there's definitely more to it, but they were great parents. I think to touch on the point of like the only child syndrome that people claim, um, I find that very frustrating. Like in on the interior for a lot of different reasons. And one of them is because I just am not, it's a stereotype, and it's like, it's a prejudice. But I think what really bothers me about it is that like people have always said that to me in my life, even though, I mean, you kindly just said that I in a lot of ways am not, but I get a lot of attention at home. Like I do. Like, if for those who have been to my home, it feels like it's a museum in some ways, and it's kind of annoying and freaky. Um, but it's one of those things where I didn't ask for it. Like, it's put on me. Like, it's something that's just is put in front of me. Like, my parents are talking to their family friends, or we're talking to family. Like, there's that intensity, but it in some ways almost bothers me because it's not something I'm looking for. Not to say I don't appreciate, the care and empathy, and that people put that energy into me. I really do. But I think it's, I'm not to say it's not earned, but it's in some ways like it puts a lot of pressure on an individual, which I've definitely felt in my life. But it's also one of those things like when people say, "Oh, you're an only child," like you get all of these things. It's like I didn't ask for that. In a lot of ways, I wish I wasn't. So to that point, I think I've always just tried to push against that. And therefore, on top of a lot of reasons why I think I just try to be a caring, loving person related to faith and a bunch of other reasons, I think it's also just because in some ways I like breaking the stereotype. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and you mentioned faith there at the very end, which I want to get into more later on, but I think it's a good jumping point to get into.
Yeah,
Similar to everything we just talked about, was that something that was always instilled in you growing up, or was that something that was more acquired over time?
definitely acquired. Not to say my family isn't religious. My family is. We're Irish Catholic, and I will say our family kind of fits the typical profile of an Irish Catholic family. For those who don't know, that's in touch with faith, pretty much with the traditions, but there isn't always much conversation about the underlying experiences that people are dealing with. um, so I'm definitely I grew up with a lot of faith. I sang in church choir all through grade school. I did that pretty intensely, and I could talk about that for a while. But I don't think I really got in touch with my faith until like senior year of high school.
Yeah.
So it kind of hit me late, and you happen to you and a lot of people that know me pretty well got to know that got to know me after those occurrences. So it's kind of an unknown for a lot of folks.
What do you view in yourself as the biggest difference between those two periods in your life? The period where you're not as in touch with your faith versus the period where I've gotten to know you, where you're someone who I admire for your dedication to your faith,
Yeah,
and as someone who I constantly learn from in times of difficulty and times of struggle, which all members of faith, whatever faith you choose to practice, have. You're definitely someone I look up to in that sense. So,
yeah,
what
I
is it?
definitely think your point on just like highs and lows, like faith's a journey.
Mhm.
So like I view a lot of aspects of my life as a journey, and that's a bigger conversation, but particularly with faith. Um, and so like I view that my faith was there in my childhood and my upbringing and all that, but at the same time, I think what really was the differentiator between those two time periods of like pre-serious faith intensity or care or desire for it versus not thinking about it as much was I'm still like I think a kind happy person, but I think in a lot of ways I was dealing with like personal struggles I wasn't talking about, and I'm not trying to get like super heavy in that, but more just the fact that I think it's easy as a child, particularly when you're kind of alone in a lot of situations, to want to fit in and like do things to make sure that you have support around you. And I think a flip switched in high school, like in high school, that like I can only be me, and like if people don't like it, that's their bleeping problem. Like
Yeah.
that's people that love me for who I am will care for me for who I am. And like I think I'm grateful to kind of come to a lot of self-reflection and awareness in an earlier phase of my life than probably some other people would. And I'm not throwing other people under the bus, but I just feel very grateful that I got to experience some of those things, whether even though it may have felt late for me, like senior year of high school, to kind of accept that like was really great, because then when I got to college, I really got to enjoy those years and now enjoy my life now.
Yeah, and I know I just resonated with that answer very heavily, and I'm sure other members of the audience are going to as well. It's something I still struggle with, where
Totally.
I don't think I could have done what we're doing right now. Definitely not in high school. Definitely not even in college, probably because I cared too much about what other people would have said about me, and I would have been around too many people who would have been in touch with what was going on. Now I've gotten to a point where I'm starting more and more to not value outside opinions, especially opinions that aren't in touch with my life on a day-to-day basis.
Totally.
But again, it just speaks to who you are as a person. And for those of you who don't know Seamus as well as I've gotten to know him, because I spent so much time with him just through rowing and everything along those sorts,
Yeah.
you are the embodiment of someone who is completely comfortable with who they are in themselves and is not afraid to hide who they are, which is something I've always admired about you, both in the spiritual sense, like we're talking about right now, and just who you are as a person. It kind of tied into the question I was going to follow up with, which was that first year of college where I don't get to spend with you because you're a year older, just by
Yeah.
mathematics sake. That period, going back to your childhood, you don't have the level of attention that you've had in your childhood. You're separating from the family, your closest resource. You're going out into the new environment of college, which is a scary time for everybody. What helps you get through that initial transition period to help you find your way and hit the ground running and immediately find yourself in a position where you're making an impact on various communities on campus, off campus, a part of a team structure, and growing right away?
Honestly, people are going to hate me for my answer. It was easy. It was so easy. Like,
Really?
yeah. And you have to think about it from, again, this is the difference of perspective.
Mm.
Um, Coming from a house where I felt like I was always surrounded by like observers, or maybe that's not even the right word, but like felt like I always kind of had someone around the corner. Um, when I went to Fairfield, for those like who don't know, I'm from Philly. I could talk about Philly for a while, but that Philly and Fairfield are like 3.5 hours away. It could be 2.5 if you're driving well and there's no traffic in New York, but it's far enough that people can't just stop by. And I was fortunate that I had family literally down the road in Fairfield, Connecticut, but even though they love and care about me, like they're not checking in on me the way that like when I was in high school, where I'm working, like I'm going to school at like 7 8 a.m. to like go grind all day, to go to practice after, to go right home and do homework and have no social life, go to sleep and do the same thing all over again, and your parents are there the whole time.
Yeah.
Like going to college was the most amazing experience for me because I finally got independence I was looking for my entire life. And again, I love my parents. And like when they say goodbye to me, like I did something called the Fairfield Challenge where people move in 3 days early at Fairfield and they do like campus ministry things and get to know some like a smaller group of individuals before coming into college. That definitely helped me. But I think just being able to have comfortability with getting to know people early, along with the fact that for the first time in my life, I got to kind of create my own narrative of my individuality and like how people perceived me, not to be like, oh, new place, new me, because I don't think I changed who I was at my core, but from an external standpoint, I guarantee people in high school would have like kind of been confused about maybe not the crew aspect of me, but like the things I was so energized about or passionate about. And actually, in all seriousness, how many people probably knew me on campus in comparison to like high school? Because in high school, I wasn't like popular. I was like not like the most liked. I'm not saying I was the most liked person in college, but like I feel like I knew a lot of people in
Yeah.
college. Like, and I didn't feel that way in high school. So being able to like, I think, get comfortable with just being independent allowed me to show a lot of those aspects, which naturally attract people to want to get to know you and for
Yeah.
you to experience life.
We had a debate one time in my high school English class where we were talking about, do people change at their core?
Yeah.
And I'll always remember what my teacher said. Her opinion on the subject was, people don't change, their circumstances reveal who they really are. So
100%.
so
Which,
in the case we were, yeah.
remember Dave Patterson's email sign off every time? It's
No,
like
remind me.
sports doesn't. I'm not gonna get it exactly
Oh,
right, but
sports doesn't reveal character or something like, right?
yeah, it's like it doesn't make character; it reveals it.
It
That
reveals it.
kind of reminds me of that. What you're saying right
Yeah,
now.
it fits exactly. And when we get into sports later on, it certainly does.
Yeah,
But what we were talking about in English class was money and how money doesn't change a person; it just reveals their true inside.
totally.
Same thing with the college environment. I think being in an environment like the one we were in, that's very nurturing towards the student and the mind, body, and soul aspect of the student.
Yeah,
If you buy in to the theory behind the education, I think it really helps a student flourish in that sense where you reveal your true character.
Hmm.
And going back to the faith, when I first entered school, I was at an interesting position with my personal faith. I'm not shy about my faith. I practice Christianity. Uh,
Hmm.
I was at a place in my life where it wasn't at the focal point of my life like it is now. And going through the Jesuit education that we went through really helps me put faith as a whole at the center of my life. And I chose Christianity, but the beautiful point about the Jesuit education was that they didn't focus it specifically on Christianity. It was always about you could have faith in yourself, you could have faith in an external being. It was just about believing in something, whether it's yourself or something better. Do you think the same way about the Jesuit education specifically? It helped you conform to the environment and help you flourish?
Yeah, I would not be the person I am today without Jesuit education. Like I it doesn't even take a second for me to think about that. I went to a Jesuit high school, um, because that's the tradition in my family. Like everyone on my mom's side, like the prep, which is like the Philadelphia Jesuit high school. I've had someone in my family on both sides going there since like the 1920s.
Yeah.
So like it was pretty much like, yeah, you can apply to other schools, but like you're going to the prep. Like if you're getting in, you're going. And I thought it was just kind of like a cool place. And then like doing that, I don't think it fully clicked until senior year when I got really involved in some like mission and ministry stuff, including things like the papal visit, when the Pope came to Philadelphia, and then like doing Kairos in high school, and like getting more involved in the spirituality aspects of the Jesuit education beyond just like the core classes and the things they just talk about as buzzwords, but really getting to like know those things. Like I cannot emphasize enough how much reflection and just small group conversations about those things, particularly with like initially at the prep, like particularly with young men, like teenage guys, like opening up about like faith and emotions and personal life, like that really like is a rare occurrence in the world. And I think going through the difficulties, the pros, the cons, the highs, the lows I was going through in high school, and to have that Jesuit education of, yes, learning about all these different things and applying them to the different aspects of my life, but also gaining that understanding of why it's important to reflect and like believe. I don't want to say just also believe in something, like I'm a Catholic and I believe in things, but like to have the desire or put the energy into attempting to think deeply about those things. Like to me, it's not always about um actually ending up, again, it's about the journey. Like it's not about you finding something like, oh, I believe in this, I believe in that. It's about the effort. Like people always talk about like, oh, there's a common phrase like, I'm not I want to get into faith, but I can't, like it just doesn't seem to click. And I once heard a Jesuit say, his name is Father Martin. He's a famous writer in the Jesuit community. He said, where do you think the desire for you to look for that comes from? And like that really hit with me, because it's like it comes back to that idea of, hey, like if you're reflecting, like, or you take that effort, like that's just as important. So Jesuit education to me is like so amazing because it forces you to get out of your comfort zone and take a different perspective on, another culture, another faith, another, emotional experience, like whatever you name it, like you can apply it to so many different things. And I think I personally like found myself applying it to a bajillion different things and kind of just ran with it. And so like when I looked at colleges, like my top three schools were all educated schools, excuse me. Um, and like going to Fairfield was the best decision because I got to continue that in so many different aspects of my life.
Personally, I came from the public school system, and the Jesuit education was nowhere on my radar. It
Mm,
had nothing to do with why I picked school,
yeah.
but it's that reflection you talked about that I reflect upon my experience so much. And the education aspect of it, I can't imagine a different sort of education than the one I received, which has encouraged me to be so open minded, so curious about everything that goes on in the world and see what works best for me. And that's the main focal point of the show, that when I get further down the road and keep doing this, is exploring more ideas than I've ever had to before, reflecting upon the
Totally.
past, talking with friends and reflecting upon what we've done and how far we've come, because it's so central to my personal thesis of I want to get to a point where I find the good in all things, where I find difference, different opinions, different viewpoints on the world, and see just how much joy there is everywhere. And it's such a beautiful thing just to be able to share this kind of experience with you, because you're someone who has taught me that through your actions first and foremost, but through our conversations as well. You're someone who doesn't just talk the talk, you walk the walk. And
I appreciate that genuinely.
anytime, anytime. I don't say it enough, and I'm sorry I had to do it on a podcast for the public to hear. Where did you get that comfortability to express your faith? I know some people aren't comfortable talking about their faith in public, especially. Some people will notice that not everyone is accepting of their faith. People aren't accepting of differences in general. Where did you find the strength in yourself to be perfectly comfortable expressing who you are, and at the same time showing this immense love, is the best word I could use, a love towards everybody? You're not on a mission to tear anybody down for different beliefs. You're on a mission to put as much love out into the world as possible.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot of moments you can point to, but I think like there's always one that stands out above all the others. Like I literally get emotional talking about it, and I've definitely like gotten emotional talking about it, whether it be on retreats, like, um, but like my senior year of high school, when the Pope came to Philly, I was like going through kind of some crazy stuff in my life. The previous year and a half, I was kind of giving up on faith, and I was just like, you know what, like this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. My high school was hosting when the Pope was coming to Philly, like there was a big festival. There was like masses like throughout the city. There was this thing called the World Meeting of Families, and so because we were the Jesuit school in the area, and Pope Francis came from a Jesuit background, big Pope Francis fan, uh, we were hosting. Our school decided to host 42 Jesuit high schools from across North America, and this experience was supposed to be like a 4 day they called it a pilgrimage, which is a big deal in the Jesuit philosophy. But there was this pilgrimage. Essentially, it was going to be like a 4 day event where the first 2 days we had like small group discussions and like talking about the themes of Pope Francis's like like Catholic ideology, and with all these different like kids from across these Jesuit schools, they like stayed on our classroom floors and like lived in our school. And on the second 2 days, the Pope was going to be in Philadelphia, and we were going to go to all these events and see him and experience Catholicism like on the mass communal stage. And like I said, I wasn't really in touch with this, but I was like, you know what? This only happens once in a lifetime. Like, I'm going to sign up. My school had it was called a host team, where essentially there was about 25, 30 of us, from my high school that were in charge of the entire so-called pilgrimage. It's called To Philly for Francis. So we helped put those programs together. We were like maintenance staff for the weekend. We were making sure everyone could find like where they needed to go in the school. We were experiencing it ourselves. We got like fronts. We were only the 25 students in our school that like got access to all of these things. And from those other schools, only 6 individuals came from each of those high schools. So from that, I'm getting there. I know I'm a storyteller. Um, so it was in September. It was actually my birthday weekend, our birthday weekend. Yeah, so it was birthday weekend, September 24th through the 26th. Wait, no, that's not right. 24th through 27th. That's 4 days. And so I went in there just completely open minded, and I witnessed arguably just one of the most beautiful things I've ever like witnessed in my life. And that was people coming from across the entire country in North America, young 17, 18-year-old, maybe not even all of them Christians, but just or Catholics, but just like people on a journey. And I met some of the most unique and powerful people because it made me realize that people can be like, at the teenage level, people can be pretty harsh at times, and like people can be kind of set in their ways. And to come to a location where everyone was just so open and welcoming and like loving and just ready to have a positive experience was so refreshing, and particularly related to faith. Like it wasn't something I was absurdly in touch with, but to see everyone relate to those things that we were talking about and like talk about love and mercy and forgiveness and these bigger themes about life that people try to figure out for years, to have these conversations with people my age that went to similar high schools to me that talked about these same themes, and like in science class, in religion class, in English, like all these things, was so unique because Jesuit schools don't just like, they're not in the same area. It's not like, there's like 10 Catholic schools in a geography. There's like one Jesuit school, like maybe in a county. Like there's not many around. um, so to get to know these individuals, and like I became very close to like 5 or 6 of them, and 2 of them I still stay in touch with to this day. Like I literally was like Snapchatting them today, and to witness just like that type of genuine unconditional love from individuals, not to mention it was my 18th birthday that weekend, and some of these people were just being so kind to me that never met me in my life, up until that point, was just so empowering. And I just felt the the simplicity of faith and like what faith is all about in my life, that my mindset was like, I'm just so gifted with this grace that like I need to, the only way I can repay it, and I think it's just a common theme in Christianity that you recognize over time, is that all you can do is pay it forward. There's nothing that you can do, there's nothing you can give back to like my Lord and Savior, whoever, however you phrase, a higher being, than to do what they would do. And so like to me, it's like everything that I get in terms of affirmation, love, and care, I have to give more of in the world. So like to me, the pay it forward aspect is something I just immediately came out of the weekend feeling, and I just haven't stopped since then.
Beautiful story. Beautiful story. And it encaptures so many ideals that I want this podcast project to be about,
Yeah.
where it's paying it forward. Just
Yes.
the experience of community, sharing same thoughts, the love with other people, whether it be someone who you know deeply or someone who you meet at such a function like that, and you develop such a relationship.
Yeah.
Whether you practice Christianity, you practice a different religion, whether you are spiritual, you have a different kind of faith, it's that idea of community, of
Yes.
paying it forward, no matter what you choose to practice, feeling in touch with the world around you and feeling as if you're contributing to something greater than you. We all try to do that, I think, in one way or another, whether it be in a corporate type of setting, working for somebody else, whether it
Mm.
be in our clubs, our sports, in this case, our faith. That is so key for me in terms of finding joy, is knowing that you're not alone. When you're so isolated,
Yeah.
it's I'm looking for the best harsh word to use. It kills you to your core. I can't think of a better word right now, but isolation is a killer in terms of expressing love and finding joy in the world. When you're at Fairfield, you've had this experience in your back pocket now, and now you're in a situation a couple years into Fairfield where you have the opportunity to be a leader in the faith, be a leader in the classroom, be a leader on our sports team. What was the key for you in being a great leader? Was it using the faith as the prime driver of, all right, these are my ideals, I want to make sure I'm expressing love and care for everybody around you? Or did you have to develop some other skills along with that to help really uh, drive community into other people?
Yeah. It's a good question. Um, I can't say it's just faith, because I think, first off, I think my faith and my values are a bedrock. They're a
Yep.
foundation for it. But I think there's a couple different ways you have to think about it too. At least the way I think about it is that no person is the same. and therefore my values in my foundation may not work for you. And so I think there's two things that I think stand out, particularly as you bring up that question to me. One is I always try to keep a mindset of servant leadership. For those who don't know servant leadership, I highly recommend you look it up at some point. It's one of the most powerful things I think people can do. And it's also something that's incredibly taxing. So like you have to be careful with it, but if done effectively is one of the most powerful forms of leadership you can ever have. Um, and I think on top of that, I think, and this is kind of a part of servant leadership too, is being able the ability to step out of your own shoes and take a different perspective on things. And that's something I'm still working in, but I feel like I do my best to like do in my day-to-day life, can solve so many problems, not just as a leader, but just in the world. And so I think that ability that I tried to flex in college, particularly, I think our rowing team is a great example of this, is that Tom, you and I both know there are not a lot of people on our team that were incredibly religious. Incredibly religious.
Yeah.
When I first joined the team, there were very very few, and I was fortunate that people like yourself and Michael, who you I know at this point probably have already interviewed, and people might have seen. He's an amazing human being, and like Sean, and like there's people that are so that joined that like environment, but the reality is a lot of people that I was teammates with and like was leading at times did not align with me on those perspectives. And so trying to understand an individual and take a moment back, be emotionally intelligent enough to recognize where they're coming from. Obviously, I don't know their deep, dark core, experiences, but understands what's motivating them, how they act as an individual, how they just go about their day to day. Some people are more motivated by like harsh criticism. Other people need support. Like other people need to like just be listened to. Like to take a minute or more than a minute in a lot of these situations to recognize those things and then come in and try to, you know, target that leadership towards those individuals creates the best environment for everyone. Because if you try to lead just your way or the highway, it's not, you'll get the people that think like you to join, but the reality is most group dynamics or communities, you're not always going to have people that think the same. And if you do, that can actually be sad because then you lose, to your point about isolation of thought and community, like just in the same mindset, there's no capability of growth because now you're thinking all in the same way. And that's one of the reasons why I value community so much is because I learn from everyone around me. I learned about my faith through the community that I met through the papal visit. I learned about myself through other people's experiences. I learned from education through teachers. Like I can't learn anything on my own. I can only learn through groups. And therefore, as a leader, the best thing you can do as a leader is to take in my opinion, take in what other people are giving to you and then try to put back something out that they can understand.
Such a great point of there's isolation in the tangible sense where you could be physically isolated, but you can also be isolated in thought
Yes.
where if you don't have enough voices voicing different opinions, sharing different perspectives, you're you're going to be left behind. Eventually the times will change and you won't be able to keep up, especially if all you're trying to do as a leader is push your own rhetoric towards the group and
Yeah.
make it your way or the highway. I think that's such a great point. I think everyone should pick up on that. The biggest takeaway so far for me is that point.
Diversity of thought is one of the most underrated things we don't talk about in modern day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And
It,
willingness to listen out of that.
yeah, and that was going to be my next question. Is so many people talk about what makes a great leader. It's like a job interview question. You're reading through the description of what makes a great employee, and on highlighted and listed in bold will be excellent communication skills.
Yeah.
That will be top of the line for any employer, any team captain, like we're talking about, any leader in any organization. You know what's never on the line is excellent listener. I don't know why they never put that there, but I would make the argument that in order to become a great communicator, you have to be an even better listener. What?
I'd agree.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what is your perspective on that? How, if you had to try to make a ratio of you talking versus you listening in any leadership type of setting, what percentage of the time are you spending listening versus what percent of the time are you spending talking?
It's funny you bring up this question because I was actually thinking about this topic even before we started talking today. I had a feeling this might come up at some point. I am a well, no, I shouldn't say this so aggressively and just quick. I have been told that I'm a bad listener, and I think
Interesting.
that I mean, and I think it comes from growing up just by myself. I have to get a word in. I also grew up in an Irish Catholic family where I am the quietest person in the family, which, if you know me, is really saying something. Um, so, and if you met my family, you would understand. So, I think to get to the point of how important listening is I think that listening is actually arguably the most, besides empathy, which comes from good listening, it is the most important trait. And I think it's something that I do. I do much more speaking than I do listening than I would like, and it's something I am always trying to work on. Even on this podcast, I've had points where I've jumped in, like I've jumped in when been speaking. I'm like, you have to stop doing that, and I do it. I do it in so many environments, and it's because I'm just excited and I'm passionate and I'm energetic and I'm just a very extroverted person. But there is so much that people, particularly that are just big talkers, um, including myself, but I'm trying to be as aware of this as possible, is you learn, like, not to make the silly quote, but you have two of these and one of these. Like, there is a reason you can learn so much from listening. It's because, again, back to the community and diversity of thought idea, you can't gather any information if you're talking. You're only giving information. So, like, yeah, maybe you come to a realization yourself, but the reality is, like, that came out of someone else's thought. Like, that came out of something else. And so, to me, a good leader is someone who able to to be in the room with an individual and make them feel like they are the only person that matters in that situation, and being able to be that empathetic and that cap to be that captivated, to show that you're that captivated to another individual, is one, inspiring, but also, like, it is a dangerous tool to have for both positive and negative. Someone being able to, like, take that in and use that is incredibly powerful. And so it's always something I'm working on, because I remember when I was in college at one point, I had a friend who I love dearly and we're still friends to this day, once tell me I was a bad listener. And it was something that, like, really sat with me. And I was like, wow, like, this is something that I am not good at and, like, I need to fix. And, like, I've pretty much made it like a major goal in my life since then, like, always, like, in the back of my head, like, be a better listener, be a better listener. And I feel like it's something I'll never be amazing in, but it's something that I am always working towards, because the better you can be at that, and maybe not, it's not just sitting down and listening to someone, but just taking a moment to gather your surroundings and just, like, take a step back and just observe versus just, audio listening, um, can be so resourceful to people's lives.
It's definitely a skill that we'll never master,
Yeah.
no matter how hard we try. But it's like you said, it's something to always strive for. You can always improve upon it, and it's that self-acknowledgement, like you just said. Someone pointed it out to you in this case, whether it's true or not, whether maybe they were just having a bad day and you're like, oh, you're not listening to me, Seamus. um, but it's definitely something that you can always work on. And this might be a bit of a stretch pivot point, but I want to bring it back to faith real quick.
Always.
Whether it's Christianity, believing in a higher power, or believing in something in yourself, particularly with Christianity, because that's the one I relate to the most. What drives people away from the faith in times of struggle is that they feel like the higher power, whether you call it God, whether you call it something else, is not listening.
Mm.
You feel as if your prayers, your manifestations are not being answered, and it drives you away from having faith in whatever you choose to believe in. I know from a religious standpoint, it's a bit different than someone who chooses more of a spiritual standpoint. Unfortunately, I can't relate to that standpoint. I would love to be able to eventually. But for the sake of our conversation, from a religious standpoint, in times of struggle, in times where believing in the faith is not a rock solid guarantee, it's something you have to work through. Maybe you feel like God isn't listening. You feel like you're more alone today than you were yesterday. What helps you get through those times?
It's a really good question. And it's something that I've struggled with a lot in terms of trying to help other people who kind of bring up a similar aspect of who is there for me, or like, it doesn't seem like I'm being listened to. Like, it's easy. Well, I don't want to say easy because that really makes it seem like a lack of effort on the individual in these situations. Um, it's very common for people when, as you're saying, when going through tough times, myself included, um, when to say that faith is not there for you and you don't feel supported or loved or individual. And I think something that gets lost on people is that, look, everyone has a different perspective on faith. And I know I've talked about this on, in conversations and, retreats and stuff. To me, faith is a relationship. And I think, like any relationship, it requires effort on both sides. And I love, in my mind, I love God and the Holy Spirit and, my faith and, Jesus, being a companion on my journey, as I say. But it takes two people or two powers or spirits, whatever you want to phrase it as, to make that relationship useful. So I think, while it may in some ways be a cop out to say that, oh, the people aren't putting enough effort in, because I don't mean it that way. Like, that makes it put it really harshly on those individuals, and I don't mean it that way. But I think going and just sitting in a, like, if you're going through serious issues, for some people maybe just going and sitting in church does help. But for me that doesn't. And like, to just expect something to change without a serious commitment, that doesn't happen to anything. Doesn't happen to anyone about anything in life, on with rare exception. There's some factor that is pushing in your direction, and to me, that's the same way with faith. So for me, when I've gone through my tough times, including, honestly, like, I'm not perfect in my faith right now. I'm definitely not at the highest point in my faith journey at the moment. But like, when I was dealing with stuff before I found my faith, I can definitely look back and say I didn't make much of an effort to have faith be a solution to it. But when I went through things in college, um, I think I did my best to dive into it. And that doesn't just mean showing up, which first off, watching your first episode about showing up, like, actually really resonated with me. And I think that is the first step of anything. It takes that much of an effort. But I think from there, you have to be willing to push yourself out of your comfort zone. And that means getting into a position where you are A, maybe vulnerable, or B, willing to speak with someone, whether that be, some people go to like a priest or, a rabbi or whatever it may be, spiritual advisor. For me, that's friends and community that I know understand. So like, people like yourself, people like our friends that are in touch with faith, like, that is where I see God most relevant in my life, like, every day. And so when I am feeling down, like, people might just say, oh, you're turning to your friends. Like, no, 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 no. I'm turning to my friends because I see God is in them. And if they're supporting me and loving me, then God is. And so to me, I feel that, to get back to the point of like God listening, is that this is an investment on two sides. And to just show up and to just speak to what I think some people, like in a movie perspective, or like, just like a storybook situation, like, to air, is not going to solve it. You can do internal reflection, but again, that takes effort. Like, sitting there is not the same as sitting there and like being mindful and like reflecting on the things you're dealing with and processing them. That is a very different situation. Like, I'm not personally the biggest believer of the like an Old Testament, like, God striking down and all these things. Like, I'm not saying it's not inaccurate, but I'm saying that there's a lot more to the situation than just receiving. It is a give and a take, and it's a relationship just like anything else.
Beautifully said once again. And I know I resonate so much with the relationship aspect of this
Yeah.
because far too often in the beginning of my journey, and I'm still in the beginning of my journey, I've only begun to explore Christianity, other different
You and me
types
both.
of, yeah,
I know I'm talking a lot, but you and me both.
yeah. I think we certainly agree on that. It's only the beginning. We're still, as much as we like to think that we're old men who have bad backs from rowing, we're still pretty young. Um,
Yeah.
the relationship, I know what has always hindered me throughout the beginning of this relationship with God, with Jesus, is there's so many questions that you can ask yourself. So many questions that people have asked for years upon years. Why would a God allow suffering to the extent that he does? Why would God allow evil into the world to the extent that he does? Why would God do all these things that are not full of good? Why? It's such a hard question to answer, and for the longest time, nobody has had those answers to those questions. And I think one of the hardest part of this relationship that we buy into is you're going to have to accept that some questions you're not going to get the answer to, just as you would in some relationships in your own life. You're
Mhm.
not going to get the answer to some questions that you want to, and you have to be comfortable with yourself and comfortable with who you are in order to progress in your faith. And in the darkest of times, in the hardest of times, know that faith is built upon this physical sense of being blind and trust in what's going to happen. And
Mhm.
you trust, in this case, in a higher power that's going to lead you to a place that you want to be at the end. It's
Yeah.
such a hard thing to do, but you have to chip away. You have to chip away at it day by day. It's like growing a business, growing in the gym, stuff like that. You have to chip away at it day by day. You might not see the results every single day. There might be downturns. There might be things that prohibit you from achieving your goal for a day.
Mhm.
But if you have this blind faith in yourself and something above you, you're not going to be deterred. You're going to persevere through everything that's thrown at you because you
Yeah.
have faith. And it's such a hard thing to acquire. And I guess the last topic on faith before we transition, if someone's looking for faith in this world, again, whether it's religious or looking for faith in themselves, what's your biggest piece of advice for someone who is in need of a little bit of faith?
That actually might be the hardest question you've asked me so far, which is so weird because it's probably the simplest at the same time. Um, because I'll start by saying there's no right answer for any individual. Everyone is unique, everyone is different, so everything's going to be different. From my perspective, I think, like anything, we can only speak to our own experiences. I'll first refer back to the point I made about earlier. It's about the desire and it's about the journey. It's about making the effort than it is about actually getting there because guess what? I'm not fully there.
Yeah.
Like, we're not. And anyone in my mind, there's probably only a handful of people that are fully there, and one of them's Jesus. So, like, there's not many people that make it to that final destination. But I think for someone looking for that or curious about that, I ask them to turn first in on their life, and I'm not saying internally, like in like inside of them. I'm asking again. I'm a strong believer. You mentioned earlier, like finding God in all things. That's something that I have heard about for a long time in my life. Well, maybe not a long time since I was in Jesuit high school. Um, and I think whether you're sitting on a hike and you're looking at nature at peace, you're sitting in a circle of friends at someone's apartment after a movie night and you're just laughing, you're walking down the street and seeing small acts of kindness through smiles or little affirmations. I ask people to look at the gratitude and the positive things that they see and tell me that there isn't something. I think that's individuals at work, but what makes the individuals at work do those things? That's the way I view it. I view things in a very much an all-encompassing kind of spiritualistic kind of way in that. And I say for anyone who's looking to faith, look at the positive things in your life and explain. I don't want to say explain to me how that happened, but like showing gratitude for that kind of makes you feel a certain way on the inside. And to me, that's faith. And I think most things positive in the world come from a place of love. And if God isn't love, I don't know what the heck is. So
Finding God in all things, finding the good in all things, which is the tagline for this show.
yeah,
No, it's no coincidence. Spoiler alert. If you,
I didn't even know that. Wow.
yeah, that's the tagline for the show. I made it that way because and again, not everyone has God in their life. Not everyone wants to have God in their life, but I think everyone can certainly find the good in all things. It
And
just takes a little bit of effort.
and I think you make a good point, Tom. Like, look, I'm about people finding it, but I'm also complete. Like, I think it's important to like preface some of these things with the fact that people who don't believe in faith, like as long as you're happy, that's all I care about. I feel like there's sometimes
Exactly.
I feel like there's sometimes these perspectives on Christianity, and like, look, some forms of Christianity are much more stronger on evangelizing, or however you want to phrase it.
Yep.
That's personally not me. Like, if someone wants to walk like up to the door and knock on it, and I can kind of help them, potentially show them the way through, and like check out faith, great. But like, to me, it's whatever helps you as an individual. Like, that's the most important thing. We want positive people in the world, and if like whatever gets you there, like that's all I care about. So I think that's just important to talk about as we get so deep on faith here, is that there's this almost under this concern about people who are religious, that they don't care about people that aren't, or think differently about those. And I just want to make sure that's clear. Like, that's not the case in this
And
situation.
I 100% agree with everything you just said. I've never made it my mission to try to convert someone to think the same way that I do, share the same beliefs, because it does not work for everybody.
Doesn't.
There's the complete opposite. There are people who have tried it and said not for me and gone.
Yeah.
And then there are people who haven't tried it, get exposed to it, and they say, maybe this is for me. It's all about seeing what works for you. And I think that's the most beautiful thing. And it's what I want for this show more than anything, is to have so many different viewpoints on here and find the good in so many different things. And I'm
Mm.
glad that we were able to have this first part of the conversation where it's just exactly everything that I couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you so much for checking out part 1 of my interview with Seamus O'Brien. Next week, we dive very deep into our time on our collegiate rowing team and how we had very different points of view on that time in our life, and specifically how Seamus was able to be such an effective leader during that time. Once again, thank you so much for checking out the show. If you like what you hear and you want to hear more, definitely follow along. Hit that subscribe button, whatever platform you're watching the podcast on. I really appreciate it. If you're on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, all the cool YouTuber stuff. You know what I mean. Thank you so much for checking out the show. It really means a lot that someone would take their time out of the day to come and hang out. It's such a privilege to be able to do this. I can't thank you enough. Until next week, I'll see you.